you might have heard on my playing example then, I was definitely getting some slightly weird triggering behaviour. I'm not reading too much into it, this is a review kit that's no doubt been completely battered. So I'm going to get out the manual, I'm going to do my homework, and I'm going to give this a fair shot. I've been excited about trying the GEWA G9 kits ever since their initial announcement, and over all the time that's passed I've been trying to keep up to date with any impressions and hands-on experience from anybody who's played or owned these kits. I have seen some pretty regular issues pop up about certain elements of these kits, but to be honest, I always try to keep in mind that people are going to complain a lot more online than they are going to say positive things. So when I ran into a few of those issues that I mentioned in my first impressions video, I didn't really think anything of it. No disrespect to anybody, it's just that usually these problems can be solved by a bit of reading, experience and experimentation, so that's what I was expecting. As you can probably guess by this strange introduction for a review and the amount of time that's passed since I posted that previous video, there's been a little bit more of a journey involved with this kit than I expected going in. I'm Luke, this is the eDrum Workshop, and I'm going to share that journey with you, but first, to maintain some level of normalcy for a review, let's have a look at the specification of the GEWA G9 Pro C5 kit. And as with any review video, full disclosure, this kit was sent to me by GEWA, but I will be sending it back when I'm done with it, so thanks very much to GEWA for that. And I've not been asked to say anything in particular about this kit. All the opinions in this video are my own. The initial setup of the kit is pretty much what you expect with electronic drums. The version I've been reviewing comes with a full DWE three-sided rack system. This is the case if you buy the kit in Europe, whereas in the US it will come with Gibraltar stands and hardware. It's a pretty simple rack to set up, nothing too out of the ordinary for eDrum racks, and everything is pretty solid. It does wobble a little bit more than I thought it would, but generally speaking, it's not too difficult to iron out any crosstalk from the vibrations. All of the provided clamps and tom holders are great quality, and the cymbal booms all use a smooth tilter system which works really well. The review kit that I received came with this DW hi-hat stand, which is a decent quality stand, but there wasn't a snare stand with it, so I used my own. Looking at the website, there's no specific mention of a snare stand, so I think this is how it will come if it's bought in the UK or Europe. So the Pro C5 kit comes as a 5-piece kit. It features an 18x14 inch kick drum, 14x5 inch snare and floor tom pads, and 10x5 and 12x5 rack toms. I really quite like the aesthetics of this kit. I think it strikes a good balance between the acoustic form factor but still maintaining some of the portability of an electronic drum kit. It's got the good head sizes that a lot of people are after these days, and the shell sizes keep it looking a bit more fleshed out than a typical pad kit, but nothing is overly deep, so it means that when you pack it down it does take up less room than a full-size acoustic kit. If you've seen my own kit in my other videos, then you'll know that this is the kind of approach that I personally favour, so I'm a fan. The wrap on the shells has a sort of carbon fibre effect that I think looks pretty good. I do prefer the wood finish on the L series of kits, but I do think that the texture added by this wrap is a bit more interesting than a plain black finish, and it also gives off a bit more of that electronic vibe and matches the casing on the module. The pads feature trigger baskets inside with centre mounted cones and a rim piezo in the basket. This is a pretty standard trigger setup and it's designed to support positional sensing. The pads also come with these plastic rim guards that don't cover the entirety of the rim. As a general idea, I don't mind it, but in practice I'm not really the biggest fan. On the snare, there are two of these covering the main areas of the rim that you're expected to hit. One for rim shots and one for cross stick sticking. You can move these around freely, there's a cutout for a lug, and you can just take them off and stick them around another one. The issue with this on a snare pad is that it only gives you the rim protection on one side for rim shots. You might want to do rim shots with both hands, which means that you'll be hitting the bare rim with one stick. Or you could bring both protectors round to the rim shot position, but then this means that you've got no guard for the cross stick, which makes it overly sensitive. Also, these are made of plastic, not rubber, so they don't really bring the volume down that much, and they offer no protection for your sticks. After a few rim shots, I'd already got quite a few dents on my stick, which is something that rarely ever happens on my own kit, if at all. It is a little bit less harsh on your sticks than the bare metal, but I feel like any chance that your stick might splinter is bad news when you're using a mesh head. The mesh heads on the kit are made by Remo and they're good quality mesh heads. Personally, I find them to be a little bit bouncier than I like. However, this is completely personal and they might be perfect for some people, so it's better to try them if you can. The kick drum pad has a big foam cushion behind the head to reduce rebound. I would also put a patch on it if it was my drum. The cymbals that come with the kit are two 14-inch crash cymbals, an 18-inch ride cymbal, and a 14-inch hi-hat with a plastic bottom to make it into a two-piece hi-hat. The cymbals have this groove pattern in the rubber on the top, and personally I don't really think it adds that much. It does set them apart a bit from other brands, but there's a textured finish on the rubber anyway that I feel like would do that on its own. What I really do like about the cymbals though is how large the bell zones are. That's something that a lot of other manufacturers don't really get right, so it's really nice to see that here, and they're really easy to aim for and to hit. The cymbals are also quite thin in construction as well. They don't feel cheap, they're just a bit lighter than I expected them to be. Under the stick, the rubber feels harder than the likes of a Roland or Yamaha cymbal pad, and they're maybe a touch louder, but I don't think there's much in it. Once again, feel is a very subjective thing, and when I've got my headphones on, I don't really feel like I notice that much of a difference between playing on these and playing on a Roland cymbal. The cymbal pads are also all 3 zones, and that's over one cable when you're using it with the GEWA module, which is great. To be honest, I feel like that should be an industry standard feature anyway, but there you go. Another great feature is that they also have a second jack output so that they can be 3-zone when used with Roland style cymbal wiring as well. The crashes and the hi-hat having a bell zone is really cool. Not all of the crash cymbal instruments have a bell sound, but some of them do. You just have to go through the sounds and check which ones. I feel like if you're going for an acoustic replica style electronic drum kit, then it makes sense to have bell zones on the cymbal pads. And having extra assignable zones anywhere on the kit is always a bonus. The module is the main point of interest that I've had ever since this kit was revealed, and it looks great. It's got a big 10-inch touchscreen, a power button, and 4 function dials, with the bottom dial doubling as a button to return to the home screen. I really like having some physical controls even when I'm using a touchscreen. My one main gripe with the Pearl Mimic Pro module is that there's only one physical dial button combo, so having more is great, although in my ideal world scenario I'd maybe still have a few more, especially maybe physical faders. There are 14 trigger inputs plus the hi-hat controller input, along with a foot switch input that can be used for functions like swapping kits or turning effects on or off. There's only a single ride input here because GEWA just used the one cable. However, the AUX inputs can double up as bell zone inputs for cymbals if you're using another brand of pads, so that's really good. Above these, there are XLR master outputs, which are great for live use, 8 routable direct output jacks, a mix-in jack, an SPD-IF output, monitor left and right jack outputs, full-size MIDI in and out ports, a USB-B port for hooking up to a computer, and a power socket. Along the front edge of the module, there's also a headphone output and a USB port for pen drives. The module clamp is very different to what other manufacturers usually go for. It's got a hardware clamp clamp that's similar to a tom bracket, which then attaches to a C-shaped rod, which in turn attaches to an adjustable tilter clamp. It is really flexible and it does allow you to get the module mounted much higher than this low profile rack would suggest. You just have to make sure that the several adjustments are secure. It does come with memory locks though, as do all of the clamps for the drum pads and cymbal booms. The trigger cable loom is also very heavy duty and good quality. Probably the best that I've seen come with a stock kit. Everything feels really solid when you plug it in, and it comes with cables for all of the main trigger inputs up to AUX 1. So as a standard, that's 2 extra cables than come with this particular kit configuration. Switching the module on, it does take a bit longer than I expected to boot, but then you're greeted with the module's easy mode, as it's called, which shows an overview of the pad setup that you can tap on to preview the sounds. I was provided with a pre-release version of a new software update, so the screen might look a little bit different than other videos that you might have seen, and some of the functions on the screen have been swapped around a bit. I believe that this new software version should be available soon, if not already by the time this goes out. So from this screen, there's access to the drum kit and the mixer, a switch for the rim play type so that you can quickly swap between cross stick, rim shot, or both on a velocity fade, the metronome on and off and a first beat accent toggle, the kit list, and the more advanced settings. Down the left hand side there are quick controls that can be adjusted using the 4 dials. There are controls for the metronome's tempo, the monitor output volume, which can be swapped to the mix input volume with this button, the headphones volume, and the master output volume, which can also be muted with a tap of this button. It's great that you're able to quickly adjust these parameters, but I would have really liked it if they'd gone a step further and allowed you to assign what you want on those dials down the side of the screen. I really think that kind of customization would have been handy, but the parameters that are there currently are very useful. If you press in the bottom dial, that will take you back to this screen from whatever menu that you're currently in. And then the bulk of the module's functionality is tucked away under this little cog on the right. Pressing this brings you to the advanced mode, which has 6 individual modes split up into 4 rows on each screen. These all deal with different parts of the kit's setup, and it's a reasonably streamlined way to categorize everything. First off, performance mode deals with many general performance options. You've got access to the drum kit choice, a visual monitor of your trigger response, quick adjustments for your snare rim style like on the easy mode, another way to view the mixer, the onboard song player, and the metronome. The song player has handy functions like setting loop points, changing the speed of the song and the volume of the audio. The metronome has the options that you would hope for, like simply changing the tempo, the time signature, the subdivision, and the sound, and it also has handy extras like a tap tempo mode, a visual metronome, and the ability to choose which pad controls the tap tempo. The kit editor mode deals with all things instrument related. At the top you can swap between the pad input, either manually or automatically as you hit a pad. Then below this you've got the instrument selection options. You can assign any sound to a zone, and you can choose whether it does this as whole instruments for all zones, or you can manually choose different instruments for each zone of the pad, using the sound grouping checkbox to swap between those. You can also edit the pad MIDI settings here. On the third row, you've got 4 different effect sends, and we'll get into those on the next mode. You can also edit the sounds with coarse and fine tuning, and attack and release parameters. The second sound edit menu lets you add a layer for that pad zone. You can edit the tuning options here, and the new software update also added the attack and release options for this second sound, which is dead useful. The 4th section on this row deals with the hi-hat volume control, and it lets you adjust the volumes of each zone and articulation. The final row in the kit editor is a pad level EQ and compressor. Some presets will have these on as default. The effects menu is next. This has 4 types of effects, the first of which is more of a microphone control than an effect. It's the ability to dial in the real room ambience samples for each instrument. Effect number 2 is a choice of instrument reverbs. I won't go deep into it, but there are various sizes of room, hall, and plate reverbs with the usual reverb controls. FX3 is another reverb, this time in the form of a room reverb. It seems to generally have the same options as the instrument instrument reverb minus the gated reverb. This kind of reverb setup follows a workflow that's often used on drum recording, so it's good to see it reflected in a drum module. The final effect is the multi-effects. This is where you can find things like delays, distortions, chorus, flanges, phasers, and so on. It's always fun to have effects that can be dialed in. Each effect has quick access to the sends via a button on the right, so you don't have to go back to the kit editor if you just want to quickly dial in the levels. When I first heard that there were 4 effects processors in the module, I assumed you'd be able to swap them all around. So for example, maybe have 3 different multi-effects and 1 kind of reverb. That doesn't appear to be the case, but there's still a good level of control for customizing your kit. The trigger settings mode is where you'll be dialing in your pads. Unfortunately, I've spent a lot of time in this mode, but more on that shortly. Up at the top, you've once again got the pad selection. Below that, you can choose your trigger selection. You can choose between the predefined GEWA kit setups, so the Studio 5, Pro 6 and Pro 5 pad setups, or you can swap to different presets per pad if your pad setup differs from the stock ones. The module contains GEWA's own presets, along with plenty of other manufacturers' pads such as Roland, Yamaha and Alesis, which is great to see. You also have the zone selection here, so head for single zone pads, head and rim for dual zone pads, bow, edge and bell for cymbals, and a hi-hat pedal section for the hi-hat. Below are the fine-tuning trigger settings, which have independent controls for each zone. Some of these controls will be familiar to users of other electronic drums. There are also a couple of other controls under the advanced settings that I wasn't completely sure on at first, such as the din level and din time. After reading the manual, these turned out to be controls for how the pad suppresses false triggers with harder hits. The manual details the best usage for them. You also have controls for the trigger type, positional sensing on pads that support it, customizable velocity curves, which I always love to see, and hi-hat calibration when you're on the hi-hat trigger settings. The calibration wizard is really straightforward and it gets you most of the way there with minimal fuss. On the bottom, there's a pad trigger monitor and a crosstalk monitor, and that's really handy for seeing any possible false triggers from other pads. The general settings mode deals with quite a lot of different things. At the top, you've got control over all different levels of routing for the pads and the outputs. This is really flexible and it lets you accomplish many different configurations. Below this, there's a master EQ and compressor for the master outputs, the headphone outputs, and the monitor outputs, which is really great. There's also a control option where you can set up different functions for the foot switch or for the pads that are connected to aux inputs 3 and 4. Below this are global MIDI settings and program change settings for the different kits. The bottom row contains general device settings, Wi-Fi settings to access the sound store and download updates through the module, Bluetooth settings for audio input, factory reset, module information, and update where you can check for updates and download them. I think it's great that they've built Wi-Fi and Bluetooth into this module because that puts the connectivity options a lot higher than a lot of other modules. Finally, the tools mode has a bunch of different functions such as the on-stage mode with setlist features, an onboard PDF reader, the import tools for downloaded sounds, the sound store where you can purchase and download new instruments, and a file manager for the internal memory. That was a lot to cover, but overall that's a good thing. It's great to see so much functionality packed into a module, and it's pretty clear that that's what they were aiming for when they gave it that workstation moniker. My main gripe with the modes though is less about the functionality and more about the interface. There is a lot crammed onto each screen. Everything ends up being really small and it can be very fiddly to fine-tune parameters. I mean, I've only been using this in a studio setting and I've had trouble fine-tuning some of the controls. I couldn't really imagine accurately doing this at a gig or in another professional setting. The Pearl Mimic Pro has a much smaller screen, but it still manages to make everything accessible. The Mimic also gives you the option of tapping on a control and then using the dial to fine-tune things. But on the G9 you don't get that option. All 4 of those dials down the left-hand side are predefined for you, so it means that there's a lot of parameters that are very important that are still hard to dial in with precision. I regularly go past the exact number that I'm aiming aiming for, then accidentally go back too far and struggle to land on the correct setting. Having to tap on a dial to open up a fader to adjust also adds an extra step into the mix when adjusting things, and it just means that I find the whole thing fiddly. The on-stage mode has big icons for this purpose, which is great, but you're understandably limited to only a few functions. And I don't really know what the solution to these problems is because I'm not a user interface designer. Maybe having more menus with larger controls on each screen is the way forward, or maybe that'll make things more confusing. I'm not really sure. I just know that the day-to-day usage of a lot of these very useful controls becomes quite cumbersome with so much going on the screen. And unfortunately, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to my experiences battling with this module. So I've reset the snare back to the factory 14-inch setting. The only difference is I've changed the velocity curve. I'm definitely still getting the problem with the missed triggers, so here's that. I really don't like making overly negative reviews. It's taken me, 3 months to make this review video, and that's because, well, I wanted to make sure that I'd exhausted every option before making the video. I've had many email exchanges and even a Zoom meeting with the very helpful GEWA staff, trying to troubleshoot some of the issues that I had with this kit. I was really hoping that some of this was due to the kit being in bad shape because it's been shipped around as a review model for over a year, and I've often genuinely wondered if I've been missing something. Here's a breakdown of my experiences. Straight away, I was getting some shaky dynamic response from the kit and some missed triggers. This is something that I don't usually worry about at all when I initially set a kit up because it's pretty much inevitable that it's not going to be perfect straight away. However, I could never dial in the pads to a satisfactory level no matter what settings I changed. So this sounds like dodgy pads then. Well, I also struggled to dial in my own pads that I have no issues with on other modules. I've got a few staple pads that are very reliable with all of my Roland modules and my Pearl Mimic Pro, but I still kept running into similar triggering issues that I experienced with GEWA's own pads when I used them on the G9. As you could see on that previous clip, if I was doing fast rolls with heavy accents, the module would often register those accented hits as the same dynamic level as all of the other hits. After more testing, I found that I could more reliably replicate the problem with different kinds of rolls. Once again, as you can see, the accented hits aren't coming through properly. I've adjusted so many things trying to iron this out, and I even spoke to GEWA about it, but we couldn't come to any solution. I was sent the pre-release version of both the new software version and the trigger bank update, and when I first installed these, it seemed like the problem had gone away. However, when I next turned on the module and started playing, I noticed it all over again. The final reply that I got from GEWA about this issue was that either there might be a pad problem, or that it might be a velocity curve problem and that I should try it on the convex 4 velocity curve. Unfortunately, I don't really believe that to be the case. If I do change the velocity curve, I still get the same behaviour, just with different dynamics. Yes, you can use velocity curves to balance out your dynamics, and you should do, but there aren't any issues hitting that accented dynamic if I do a single strike, or even if I play the roll slowly. And I don't usually play extremely fast for long sustained periods of time, but I do use quick dynamic rolls like 6-stroke rolls very often, and it really throws you off if something doesn't come out the way that you intended it to be played. I have since been sent a more finalised version of these updates, but it doesn't really seem to have made a difference. On the issue of dynamic curves, most pads are set up by default on that convex 4 setting, which is really strange to me. Everything just felt way too hot from the off, and I imagine anybody else playing with dynamics would probably notice that too. Of course, you can change it to any dynamic curve you want, or you can even adjust it yourself, but it does make me wonder why such an extreme setting is the default option. I also found that the trigger inputs in general just seem really hot. The pads also have a pretty extreme hotspot in the centre, which is usually the case with centre mount triggers, but it seems especially exaggerated on the G9. Even when I make all of the appropriate changes to the gain, velocity curves and the pad's high level settings, I can't stop the pads from maxing out at a medium strength hit. There are only 8 levels to the gain setting, but even putting the gain on 0 produces overly hot results. Pads that I use all the time on other modules are also too hot on the G9, once again maxing out at medium strength hits when I can usually get wide dynamics out of them. I'm also not really a fan of how the module handles cross-sticking and rim shots. The fact that a module in this price range can only do velocity fading between cross-stick and rim shots rather than detecting a true rim shot like a Roland module or the Mimic Pro is a big downside in my opinion. The GEWA G9 is also supposed to support positional sensing with their own pads, but I can't seem to get it to function reliably at all. There is always a chance that there's an issue with these exact pads, but it seems pretty consistent across all of them, so it seems unlikely. Also, the cymbal pads suffer from reasonably bad hotspotting too. So one of the other weird things that I was getting as well was if I turn up the re-trigger mask, so it's on 6 now, even if I just go up to 7, 8 or 9, I just get loads of random re-triggers. And, you know, obviously that should be higher than 6, of course, so I'm not sure why that's happening. I'm also getting double triggers on the hi-hat as well. So this is stock settings, except I've calibrated it. There it is. Not really sure why that's happening, but if I do bring the din level up, it does seem to stop that. Oh no. The hi-hat bell doesn't seem to be working properly either. If I hit the bell at the minute, it's giving me an edge rather than a bell, and sometimes it's the bow. I'm not sure why that is. It should be blue for the bell, right? No, it's been pretty unreliable. That was on the original settings until I just changed the bell threshold, except for the din time that I changed before. I was also getting either buggy or just unexpected behaviour from some of the trigger parameters. Changing the re-trigger mask settings seemed to give me really inconsistent results, with higher values somehow introducing more re-triggers than lower values. Some of the re-triggering issues that I experienced, such as the hi-hat re-triggering, I eventually managed to dial out with a combination of threshold and re-trigger cancel. However, it always seemed to come with some kind of sacrifice to the overall playability. I could never quite find the perfect balance. I managed to improve the bell response from that previous video, but I could still never get that perfect either. The G9 module also seems to suffer from a few other bugs as well. GEWA very kindly allowed me to access the online store through their account to download additional sounds from their store. I was really looking forward to trying these out, as that's a big selling point to me. I downloaded all of the sounds and I installed them. The module handily queues everything up, but the first thing that I noticed is that the module significantly slows down while you're downloading the sounds. It was lagging quite heavily while I was navigating and playing, which effectively meant that I couldn't really use the module's functionality while it was carrying out this procedure. And to me, if I can't use the module while I'm downloading sounds, then I'd rather be downloading sounds on my PC while I play the module. I totally understand it slowing down while you're installing the sounds. A lot of modules won't let you do any other functions while you're installing stuff anyway, but the module being effectively out of action while downloading the sounds made that handy feature pretty redundant to me. And next up, so I've been having some issues with some of the sound store sounds. These are the new classic Star ones. I tried downloading them and the snare and the toms weren't working at all at first. So no sound, no sound, no sound. And then I deleted them and then I re-downloaded them to see if I could get them to work again. And now the rack tom works, but the rest of them still don't, despite having the instrument selections on there. So I'm not quite sure what the deal is with that. Now, the kick drum did work at first, and I layered up the sub kick and it sounded really cool. But now, whenever I hit the kick drum, I get this sound. So I think something's happened to the kick drum sound too. So I'm going to try and delete and re-download and reinstall some of them. I have no clue why this happened, and neither did GEWA. I eventually deleted them all, did a factory reset, and then re-downloaded and installed them, and the first sounds that I tried that didn't work before now worked. However, some of the sounds that did work now didn't, and the module started lagging quite heavily after I'd installed all of the sounds. When I later installed the newest version of the software updates, the module started running smoothly again, and then I realised that that's because it had deleted all of the sounds. So the module's telling me they're all still installed, but it's also telling me that there's 0% of the memory used. According to the manual, that's not supposed to happen when you update the firmware. It's only supposed to happen with a factory reset, and I didn't do a factory reset this time. I couldn't face the idea of installing all of the sounds again, so I just haven't. Unfortunately, the lagging software on the module isn't exclusive to this area either. Overall, I found that the software lags a bit just in general use. The touchscreen isn't as responsive as I would expect it to be either. I often find myself having to press the same parameter multiple times. When coupled with the lag, I've often found myself reopening menus that I wanted to close, closing menus that I wanted to keep open, or just plain selecting the wrong thing. And I don't know if the screen responsiveness issue is the screen itself or whether it's just to do with the software. Either way though, it feels like the software is pushing the limits of what the hardware can do. Now, this one is subjective, but the sounds in the module aren't really to my tastes. The first preset starts things off reasonably well. In my opinion, it sounds like an acoustic-like rock kit. And there are also some nice jazzier sounding kits in the module too. But the majority of the sounds seem quite processed, and the kits that are using those sounds all feel a little bit weird. Again, this is a really personal thing, and some people are going to love these sounds. And of course, there are a lot of examples of really bad sounds in a lot of other modules. The fact that GEWA seem to be willing to keep adding more sounds to this module, though, is definitely a positive thing. When it came to trying to create my own kits on the module, I found the experience of building kits to be really fiddly. For example, as I mentioned earlier, there's a sound grouping checkbox on the instrument selection screen, and you can use this to select the head rimshot and cross stick, or bow, edge and bell samples together. I've found using it to be really awkward though, especially on snare drums. You get the option to select individual snare center or side sounds, denoted by the letter C or S, or you can choose CS, which is a blend of center and side together when you're using the positional sensing. This is a really good option to have, that's not the problem. But if you're using the sound grouping option, you have to specifically choose the CS sound on the head for it to automatically assign the rim and cross stick sounds. Otherwise it will just ignore the sound grouping option and select that one single articulation for that zone. You can select the rim shot or the cross stick sample instead, and then it will also auto assign those, but generally speaking, I just regularly found myself getting tripped up with it. Again, this is not necessarily the wrong approach, it's just something that added to that clunky feeling of things being more awkward than they needed to be. You also can't use instrument grouping at all on the second sound editing when you're layering sounds. So if you want to use all three articulations of one snare as the second sound layer, you have to go through the instrument selection process for all three zones individually. There's also no way to group parameters for all zones either, so if you want to retune a snare drum, you've got to make the edits on each zone individually, and then on the second layer individually too if you want to use that layer. Again, this is another double-edged sword. It's great that you can individually edit all of these things, and I don't want them to remove that feature, but the fact that you can't link them all together if you want to for speed is a bit of a problem. You also have to manually save all of your changes to a kit, and I don't really like it when modules do that. There's no dedicated button on the kit edit screen for this. You have to bring up the kit list and then hit save on there. It doesn't sound like this would cause many issues, it's just something to remember, but I once lost an entire edited kit because the module lagged while I was trying to open the kit list. Naturally, I thought that it hadn't registered my tap and tapped again, but while I was doing so, the module caught up and treated my next tap as me swapping kits. All of the edits that I'd made to that kit were then lost. I'm well aware that I'm going to run the risk of sounding like a hypocrite asking for more things up on the screen, but an obvious save button on the kit editing screen and a toggle to be able to link pad zones together would be really useful features. So even to me, some of these things are starting to feel on the verge of being a little bit nitpicky, and I can't go on forever, but unfortunately, that's where I'm at with this kit now. I lost the enthusiasm for the kit that I had when going in, and to be honest, it's bummed me out. And I'm sure you've probably noticed, but I keep having to tack on to everything. Maybe this is a problem with this exact model and other people won't have these issues. But I just can't talk honestly about my experience with the kit without including all of these things to justify myself. And unfortunately, I always end up at this conclusion. At the moment, especially at the price range that the kit's going for, it can't really touch a Roland kit in terms of performance and reliability. And it's not going to rival standalone modules like the Pearl Mimic Pro in terms of sounds. And although I haven't tried the F-Note or Yamaha kits yet, I would still have a hard time selling the G9 over what I've seen from those so far. But it does feel like there's a lot of ambition behind this kit, and I applaud GEWA for going for it. Their support and patience with me over the time that I've had their kit has been top notch, and it shows me that they believe in their product. So on a positive note, I don't think that this is completely insurmountable. There is a lot going for GEWA's approach to this kit. It nails the aesthetic, it gets the pad sizes pretty much bang on for their target audience, the idea behind their module is a solid one, and there's a lot of features in there that, if realised, could offer a lot more than some other brands. The overall flexibility of the inputs, the outputs and the routing is really good. 3 symbol zones with 1 cable. It's the triggering and the software that need the attention, and of course these are the fundamentals, so they can't be overlooked. But I do believe that it's possible to resolve these things, and that would make the kit a lot more compelling, especially if they keep adding sounds to their store. I do really hope that they keep persevering and get the G9 or its successor to that level. I want to be excited for this kit again. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. It's one of the hardest videos I've had to put together, and I really appreciate you taking the time to watch it. If you love your electronic drums and you just want to get a bit more out of them, either check out my tutorials or check out my store at thedrumworkshop.com. I've got kits and samples for several electronic drum modules up there, and that's how I fund these videos. If you want more reviews, here you go, up on the screen. And of course, above all, enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to go for a nap, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.